All right, time just to get started on this 63 AC30. A lot of prep work for the actual work to follow when parts start to arrive. And I was looking at everything I need to do in the time remaining today. I've got a, I don't remember the year, black panel Pro Reverb to get to as well. I think I'm going to do that tomorrow, start tomorrow morning on that. Good Sunday project. So I thought I'd do some of the work on this AC30 this afternoon. So one of the things I just did is I removed the egg foot switch. It's a repro, not an original. So I will put a plug on the end of that, and eventually we're going to put some holes, some better jack mounting points in this slider board so things can be plugged and unplugged more easily. But for right now, I'm going to get started on cleaning up some solder stuff as I go. Where's all my desoldering braid? I've got a new one around here I'll find in just a second. So I'm going to be removing some parts that I know will be changed. Whoever installed these cathode bypass caps, and you know, the Sprague Atom bypass caps are a good quality part. The large voltage atoms these days are a bad joke, but the smaller ones are pretty good. Did not install them well. A lot of bad solder work there. Let me move this back so I can access things without the camera being in the way. So I want to very carefully start removing things without straining the old tag board connections, because the tag board connections get fragile. And if you've never done this before and you start removing parts, take pictures, make drawings, whatever you need to do so you know where things go back and the polarity. Now, solder suckers can really damage the hell out of the tag boards on old JMIs. So I try to avoid anything with any kind of mechanical force. Just a gentle application of desoldering braid. A spool of this stuff is $7, and with an amp that's intrinsically worth this much, I'll happily go through an entire spool. And yeah, it's slower than other methods, but it's gentle, and it's precise. So the downsides are all just a matter of being lazy rather than anything having to do with the actual work. So I guess I just won't be lazy. And I've got a whole bunch of 22 gauge solid core wire in various colors with a Teflon jacket. It should be here pretty soon. So any of these burned wires that I need to replace, I can replace with pretty much the same stuff it always had, though I'll be using the Teflon rather than the PVC, because the PVC burns and melts in odd ways. And I apologize if this is slow. I want to be very cautious because these tag boards like to break. There's one I documented in the first video that I'll probably get to in a little bit where someone just snapped it off. You can't treat these like you would a Fender eyelet board. it won't survive. So let's get this one out too. Not shown, but before I did this, I made sure that there was no voltage stored up in any of the caps. Didn't really feel like getting electrocuted for your amusement today. All right, next up, I'm going to remove this top boost circuit because I need to be able to see all the stuff beneath it. And we'll put it back later. Get the right size screwdriver for that screw. Is there a nut back there? Yeah, there's a nut back there. Speaking of such things, those slots where the cage nuts used to be, the slots are all messed up, and I'd mentioned maybe fixing that. Turns out that the owner of this amp has a North Coast reproduction cab. It fell down. I'll fish it out in a minute. And that panel doesn't even have spaces for those screws to go. So there's a 220 pocket farad cap on that normal volume. That's crazy bright for a JMI. Tack solder there to that resistor. We can do better than that when we put it back together. Shield the ground here. There's one out. Really crappy solder here. This connection, I'll be replacing these shielded wires with something prettier. On the ground, just tack solder. Get that little bit of solder out. That fell, damn it. Well, in a little while, I'll take this and shake out any little bits like that fall down into things. And if you hear my family in the background, it's a Saturday. All right. So this add-on is not JMI. This is a later kit, I think. It's got a belt and socket, all new components, everything in here, and Fender style wire. I'll take a closer look at that after it's all disconnected. For right now, let me just disconnect and get out of the way. So I got a positive wire that's coming from the added node down in the power section. Let me disconnect that real fast. And this heater supply, they grabbed it from the indicator bulb area. The one connection in the whole damn thing where they actually had some mechanical support. It's not necessary to have 20 gauge solid core wire for just heaters for one 12AX7. This leaves us with just one ground wire here. And regardless of whether it pulls out or not, I'm going to be replacing it with period correct wire. So we'll take a look at this at a later time. Make sure it's wired correctly. It's not very pretty, but so this amp originally was a non-top boost. That is not a factory edition. They've got a bright circuit added to the normal channel. So this is the wiring that you'd find on the treble version of this amp with the 330K resistor before the volume, and then this 220K cap across it. Makes for a very, very bright vibrato channel with even less gain. Not a fan of that. Certainly not the original cap. I don't know whether this was a treble or normal version of the AC30. a lot of the telltale stuff has been changed out. I know that whoever did this needs to have their hearing checked. Got a mix resistor up there, a bad splice. All right, so I got some caps to undo there. I think I'll go ahead and undo that stuff. Hopefully you'll be able to see this. What's the point of having all this sleeving everywhere if you just burn it? Got a whole bunch of different colored sleeving on the way as well. It's a good thing I'm not a fan of the sound of this because it wasn't soldered at the other end. It was just wrapped, not soldered. Let's see if I can extricate that. Let's see, just wrapped around. But it's soldered to itself. Even if it's not soldered to the resistor it's supposed to be soldered to. So this channel would have been getting intermittently extraordinarily bright. Probably fluttered whenever you played a low note. Not that you would hear too many low notes through that. Lots of little bits of solder floating around in here. I'm sure from the previous guy. Just flopping around, waiting to short out. This whole thing will get cleaned and brushed, and I'll be sure that there are no little unwelcome guests floating around. Let's get this stupid bright cap off the normal channel. If you have an AC30 and you think the normal channel is too dark, before you make it mega bright with large-ish treble caps like this, first consider making it a little less full, because that thing is crazy full of low end. And once you get the stuff below 30 hertz out, you begin to hear a more balanced sound. A little bit of a bright cap can be okay, but 220 is pushing it quite a bit. That wire is all, it was never soldered in right. Look at that, that's just, it was bird's nested and just pressed in place. And this one's equally ugly. I'll probably end up redoing this little bit that I'm on right now, but I'll redo these joints as well on the tremolo circuit, just because they're so, whoever did this before, not sure what solder they're using. Was it acid core? Plumbing solder? And again, I'm being very careful about any pressure, because these lugs can be fragile on these pots after so many years. Phenolic ages. Phenolic gets weak. Just kind of very gently scrape some flux and tarnish off these things. All right. Let's see, I've got just enough slack there. If I need to redo this, I've got some blue wire coming. I'll be triple checking this resistor later and maybe replacing some of that fugly insulation. But for right now, as I was explaining to the owner, my game plan for this is to leave the top boost brilliant channel out, leave the vibrato channel out, and just first get the output section working and the normal channel, because it has the fewest number of components. And once this amp sounds right with the normal channel, and I will know at that point that the normal channel and the output are good, then I will add on the top boost brilliant channel, and then I'll add in the vibrato channel. So if I start to get noise when I add one thing in, I know the problem is there. I'm not chasing a stray noise just somewhere in the amp. Let me pause this here. I need to shake this chassis out. It's got so many little giblets of stuff in it. Okay. It's got 100 picofarad generic silver mica across the top boost volume. That's not going to make the cut. That red wire is now original to the amp, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. When I get my preferred solid core wire in, I'll replace that. For right now, I'll give it a little bit of clean solder. And I want to argue with what I just said a few minutes ago. I think what I'll do is since this amp in current condition is non-top boost, I will go ahead and reconnect the brilliant channel connection here, because otherwise this normal channel will have more gain than it's supposed to. With the top boost out of the circuit for right now, the old non-top boost brilliant is also a very simple channel, so I can deal with that as far as troubleshooting. About 60% of the components in this amp, maybe a little bit more, are all for the very complicated vibrato channel. All right, let's see. Let me get this really ugly bypass cap out. Why would you do this? Now the generic silver mica here. All right, we're gonna start taking out some of this really ugly solder. We'll start with this Sozo cap with that honking big glob of yuck. See if this comes out. Do you have any flux to it whatsoever? I don't know what solder it was, but I know that it did not have their iron hot enough. I know this is really fascinating to watch. I know you just can't stand how cool this is. Sure, you wouldn't rather be watching yet another video on the Fender Acoustasonic? I'm sorry, that was so last year. This amp has got a mixture of original carbon composites, which I have not measured yet. A couple of new carbon composites like this one, and some carbon films. And the owner says he does not care about the material or being exactly period correct. He wants the best sound. So once I get all this cleanup work done, I'll be taking some measurements and making some judgment calls. For right now, I just want to know that the solder joints aren't just full of acid core yuck. Every solder joint needs to be known good. Every single one of them. Now things like this here where you have this wire with all the burned insulation, I'm going to be replacing big sections of that. So I'm not going to do everything right now. I'm not going to redo the joints on those Sozos just yet. I want to get this one out because I know that the connection on the other side is just as bad. Oh, let's see if you can see this. It was never soldered. No, never fully soldered. I could pull that out if I just tugged at it, except the board, the tag boards are so fragile. I don't want to do that. I'll deal with those later. And burned wires a little bit later. I'll put that cap back for right now. I don't know if it's going to make the grade in the final amp, but there's nothing wrong with it, at least initially. So get it back in place. And that will not be the, if that cap stays in, I'll redo that more beautifully. That's actually quite good. It's just not as centered as I'd like, and I can clean up the solder joints on that a little bit later. All right, let's see if I can show this. All right, down here beneath these mangled, burned wires are the main preamp ground connections. And that's where they've grounded the top boost add-on ground. So if I move this wire out of the way. It's one of the reasons these wires got all soldered, got all burned, because they were adding this wire in here. Now, let me fish this out without burning the stuff adjacent to it. That's what have they done to us here? That's pins 4 and 5 in the heater. And then that's the chassis connection from heater to ground, which is a good thing to get rid of in these amps. We'll give the heater supply an artificial center tap later. This should come out now. Other than that, it looks pretty good in that spot. Let me snip out the old heater wire fully. Very tight quarters. Let me fish that stuff out. Later, I will be taking that nut out and cleaning all that stuff off. But I'm looking at this wire here. Is that just a bend, or did they break that between pins 4 and 5 on the heaters there? Some fresh solder will tell me. That's good. It's mechanical wrap. All right, I want to make sure that tube definitely heats up well. Before I move on to the power section, I want to show a few other things. Here's a great example of someone messing where they shouldn't be messing. Beneath this 4.7 nanofarad cap is a 47K resistor, and they changed that resistor. And the schematic for the AC30 shows 4.7 nanofarad, 4.7 nanofarad, 4.7 nanofarad, 4.7 nanofarad, 4.7 nanofarad. This is a 47 nanofarad cap. This was originally here. Or maybe this is a factory mistake. Every JMI that I've had in that has had, or I've seen pictures of, has had a 47 nanofarad here, where the schematic showed a 4.7, and the rest have all been 4.7s. But the solder joints on this 47 look original, so I'm wondering if that's a factory mistake that this guy replicated when he took this out to change out that 47K. Either way, the channel is, the Vibrato trim channel is very anemic with that 4.7 bypassed, but it gets much nicer sounding with the 47. So I'll be transposing these two capacitors later. And there's some stuff here in the Vibe trim that's been repaired, not very well. 2.2 nanofarad that's just kind of up in the air as opposed to really being secured. Another cheap ceramic. This ceramic here is a Hunt's. It's probably not very good. There's an old dog leg under here. These caps often fail, and it's just best to replace all of them. This Wema gold foil from the center of the Vibe trim switch has broken off where it would have been connected at the board. It was just floating around in there. So I will reconnect that. That cap is probably fine, and there's enough lead for me to take off a bit of the old tubing and reconnect it properly. Things like this where they burnt the wire, I'll try to recreate that stuff nicely. Anything else to say in this area other than why? I guess you can't really see what I'm talking about there. This is the cap where the broken lead is going to the Vibe trim switch. So there's enough length there I can take off all of that tubing and reconnect it. And I'll change out all the stuff that was underneath it. And this wire's got some burn. I'll be making that all better. It's just so aggravating that this is necessary because someone was in a ridiculous rush. This solder joint doesn't look its best. I'll confirm that later. Here's another thing I just saw. Someone redid the ground connection for the shielded cables there and just really messed that up. That's a terrible looking connection. Let me see if I can clean that up real fast. All right, about midway through the fix, I got a lot of the solder off and I slid the whole thing to the left. And that bit of the bus wire there where that solder joint was trying to be made is all tarnished. I want to scrape it clean and tin it. It just had so much oxidization over the years, so you can't solder to it as it is. When this was new, it was fresh and clean. And I imagine, given its dent here, the screw that used to be here contacted at some point. So let me see if I can get it hot by itself. Let's see if I can flow some solder to it just from touching it. The solder with a flux on it should do a good job of cleaning this some more until it will accept solder in that area, like so. And now, it's hard to do with the camera there. Slide this back where it's supposed to be. I should get some bonding. True metal to metal. Instead of having this metal on top of the ground bus wire, but not actually connected to it. All right, onwards and downwards. Okay, I've decided that I will have an HT fuse holder in the amp, but it will not be the one that came in with. I'll get these wires to pull out. Nothing inherently wrong with this fuse holder. It's just flopping around, and I don't like high voltage things flopping around, even if they're all wrapped in plastic. So that's gonna get a new one, which is screwed in place and very easy to change, which means that I can take these wires out. And let's see, the ground connection here has two connections to the power transformer. And that's going to be the center tap and the screen, so the shielding of the entire transformer goes there, as does the HT center tap. And I'm going to run a wire from the dual section filter cap, the can cap, to that same point, because the reservoir cap ground and the center tap, HT center tap ground, are the noisiest in the entire amp. I want those away from everything else, and I'm going to have still done here. I'm just going to make sure everything is clean, good metal to metal contact. Let's see, next thing as a consideration. I know that the Albion power transformer is original to the amp. I'm not sure at all that this Woden transformer is original to the amp, and I'll show you why. The primary connections are all fugly from the previous guy, but I don't see any reason for him to have made those joints fugly unless he were installing this Woden output transformer. If this were the original output transformer to this amp, I can't, just don't see why he would have messed with those, and they're so bad. So every connection to that output transformer, even the ones going into the little terminal block for the secondaries, are just a little suspect, and it's the case on both primary connections, and of course the center taps, though the center taps are by necessity messy because this guy put in this cap. So that's a mystery. Though, it's a period correct Woden from what I can tell. So once I get it all hooked up, if it sounds good, great. For right now, though, we've got bigger fish to fry. When I redo other things on these output sockets, these joints will at least get cleaned up. Here we got that Vibe trim filter cap, which is broken off of its ground lug, and this whole phenolic is broken. So this is going to become disconnected for a while. Put that to the side. And here we've got this 22K dropping resistor. Now this big high wattage resistor was not chosen because there's any real wattage to this drop across the 22K. It's just physically to span that distance. I'll measure it. If it's 22K or thereabouts, it can stay. If it's drifted too much, there are a lot of replacements. And then this wire goes to the preamp nodes of the Vibe trim channel. So let me measure this real fast and see what it actually is. 21.58, so that's fine. But this broken phenolic is not going to hold this or any other filter cap in place, so time for this to go. Let me find the nut that fits this. Okay. Let's get this nut out, see if I can reach around the other side. Okay, old broken 3 connector, new 4 connector, 4 terminal connector. The reason I'm using 4 instead of 3 is while I want this to be tight to the chassis, I'm not using this for ground. I'm going to run a ground wire from here to the point on the circuit where that ground is made, which will then be made to the chassis itself on the other part of the chassis. This chassis that they have in AC30s is a 2-part chassis, and it's bolted together. And as much as possible, I like to keep all the preamp stuff on the preamp part of the chassis. They did this cap on this side. There's no reason not to. Originals typically had it over there, but I'll do it on this side. It will actually be soldered this time. That's very nice on the 4 terminal. You can hear my wife outside talking to the dog or someone. Well, actually, I'm going to hold off on that. I'll redo that later because I need to replace that bit of red that someone burned. So these 2 will go here. This will go here. I'll put a little dab of silicone just to help hold it in place. And then there'll be a black wire from here to the preamp. That'll be a much more solid connection for this. All right, so that'll be a secure way to mount that. From what I can tell, this is fine. Got some new resistors coming, new cap here for the output cathode. That will all get cleaned up in the process. This wire is going to go away. As I mentioned, this CAN negative is going to be run with a new wire over to the other bolt where the HT center tap is made. And this ground point on the chassis here will only be used for the output cathode. This cap is an added end cap for the top boost circuit. And I think we're probably better off, for a multitude of reasons, having that cap physically be mounted, where'd it go? To the top boost card, which I have misplaced. There is space to do a small high quality radial cap here. The last one that came in with a very similar kit had that there. I think that makes a lot more sense, and it will all be grounded to the same point in the preamp stuff. So this cap, filter cap, can go away. I will leave the 22K dropping resistor there. It's tied into the screen node, and that will all be fine. So I'll just run a wire from there, which goes to the B+ connections in that top boost card with a new filter. And all these joints are going to get cleaned up very soon. I've got new resistors arriving, new heat shrink stuff, and make it all pretty and all solid. That is to come. Just looking at it like this, just the work I've done today, which is not much in the grand scheme of things, though some of it was painstaking, lets me learn more about the circuit and what's necessary, what work is coming up. I'm going to get this out just because it's so fugly. And yeah, a small additional parts list together. Caps, primarily capacitors that are needed for some of the filters in the vibe trim channel. Ugly solder joints cleaned up. And there's just excess dripping places. I'll get all that out later. And this ground and and this ground and the one I showed you earlier over in the preamp area. I'm going to physically remove all the hardware and make sure the chassis connections are clean before I put it all back together. And there's another solder blob floating around. I wonder how many of these in total will come out of this amp before I'm done. Well, between the weird solder joints on every connection on this output transformer and the fact that physically it is more narrow than the ones that JMI would have spec'd out, because they would have come over by another ½ an inch and up a little bit so that screw hole could connect, I decided to look up the date code. And this Woden output transformer is from 1983. So 20 years after the rest of the amp. So this is a non-original output transformer, and you can kind of see the old footprint would have been a little bit wider. Now this may sound great, but it is not original, and I just got off the phone with the owner. Now the owner has two AC30s. He has this 63 JMI, and he has a 10-15-year-old AC34 built by the short-lived JMI company, which is not the same thing as the Jennings Musical Instruments, but the guy who tried to revive it about 10-15 years ago, whatever. So for the AC34 he had ordered some transformers from England, some old ones, and that included an Albion power transformer, an output transformer, and a Woden choke. So what he's done is he contacted the seller in England and is having them delivered here to me. And it's supposedly a 63 Albion output transformer. And once everything else is done, we are, I'm going to put the Woden choke in here and send this Mercury back with the amp. And the Mercury's a fine choke. It's just not original to the, or period original. So he can have that as a spare, or he can put that in the other amp, whatever. And we're going to do an A-B shootout of between this Woden from 1983 and what purports to be an actual 63 Albion output transformer. And whichever one of those sounds better is the one that will be either installed in this, will be the one that goes home with this amp. This one seems a little bit smaller than I'm used to. Doesn't mean it sounds bad. This may be the better sounding of the two, but we will find out. And I can quite easily do a switch or two so I can have either transformer connected to the tubes and the power, and just switch back and forth. It'll be it won't be like, here's this one, here's that one. It'll be, here's this one, power the amp off, make a few switches, here's that one. But I can give it the same source material with a looper, and we can all hear what the differences will be between an 83 Woden and a 63 Albion. And I think I've got, yeah, I do. I've got a Mercury Haddon clone here, I think, at the same time. Maybe I'll be able to compare all three. But that's down the road. Until everything else is done on this amp, I think this Woden's going to stay in place, and then we'll get to that part of the fun. But I'm thinking it's probably likely that this amp will go home with Albion power and output and Woden choke. Maybe the 83 Woden will make the cut. We'll see. This is the fun stuff.